Welcome to part 4 of a mini-series where we are deleting the DOD and AFM for my 2014 Silverado. In today's video, we're going to be disassembling the motor. So if you've been watching along with us, welcome back. In the last video, we pulled the motor out of the vehicle, and if you guys haven't watched that yet, you can check that out at the link above or in the description. As you mentioned, this is part 4. In part 1, we went over how much power my truck made stock, and in part 2, we went through all of the parts. So in this video, we are going to be removing the valve covers, heads, the oil valley cover right here, the timing chain cover, the oil pan, and the manifolds from my 5.3 liter Ecotec V8. Now the purpose of doing this is so that we can fully remove the displacement on demand or active fuel management on this vehicle to prevent it from failing. It's outside of the manufacturer's warranty, and I want to make sure this truck lasts for quite a while. First, we're going to go ahead and remove the exhaust manifolds. Now we decided to do this outside of the truck because it was really easy to unbolt these from the cats. It was just 3 bolts with the fender liners removed, very easy to get to. Then we're going to remove the valve covers and the heads, and then we're going to follow that up by removing the timing cover right here, and then last but not least, we're going to pull the oil pan off the bottom. The engine stand that we are using is from Harbor Freight, and so far it seems pretty good. We haven't really messed with it too much, but we'll definitely leave a review of this in the description of one of the videos on how well we think it does. But one thing that this kit does not come with is the bolts to mount up to your block. So we got a kit off of Amazon, and we will have this linked in the description of the video so that you guys can have the right bolts to mount up to your motor. So this kit had 4 bolts that work perfectly for our application. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the spark plug wires. So they have this metal shielding right here. You can kind of twist that and pull it off. And if you can't quite get your hand in there, you can take a pair of needle nose pliers and use that. Spray down all your manifold bolts with some PB Blaster, and then you're going to use a 13mm socket to remove the 5 bolts holding in the manifold. That one broke. Now it's pretty common for these manifold bolts to break just as this one did. Now fortunately this one broke off where there's plenty of thread sticking out that you can get it off. If this happens, take some heat to it and get some vice grips on there, and you should be able to get it off without an issue. Now fortunately in our case we have brand new heads that are going to go on here, so it's not imperative for us to get this out, but we will get it out at a later time. Now, as we mentioned, we tried to remove the fuel rails before pulling the motor, and we were just having a very difficult time getting those out. So we are now using a pry bar. You can see we have some microfiber towels wrapped around it just to not scratch anything. Now, when you're prying up on this, make sure you're very careful not to pinch any of the wires running along the fuel rail. Make sure those are out of the way. So the injectors are basically press fitted in there, and the gaskets around them are just holding this really tight. You can see we have all 4 bolts pulled out of here. Now these bolts are captive, but they will come out once you pry it a little bit. Literally lifting the weight of the motor right now. It's starting to come up, so I'm going to move my way back now. If this is giving you a hard time, you are going to have to pry against it, so there's just no really good way to get this out safely. Just take your time with it and work your way back slowly. So we were able to get the first 3 released, but the last one, for whatever reason, would not pop out, most likely because the angle was too bad with the first 3 released. So we got those out, and then we were able to release this clip from the fuel rail. So if you look here, this clip, you can see it's installed right here still, goes around and holds the injector onto the fuel rail. So we managed to pry the clip loose, not off because there's not enough room to remove it off with the heads installed, but we got it loose enough that we were able to pull the fuel rail off and then pry up on the collar on this last injector and get it to release. It also looks like we bent the fuel rail slightly during our efforts of prying it off. You can see a little bit of a bend right there, so we'll see if when we go to reinstall this causes a problem. We may have to replace this. We have the clips pushed back a little bit further now. You can kind of see I have them cocked down into that opening right there. And we're gonna try to get the fuel rail off now. So a lot of different pry tools I've been working with. This kind of works pretty well because you can get on both sides of the clip and release it. But there's not really a great way to do this. You're gonna need a few hands, but we're gonna keep going at it. So we don't always want to act like everything goes perfect, and this is definitely one of those videos where everything does not go perfect. So even though the fuel rail came off much nicer this time, and we should be able to get all these injectors out without bending anything, the gaskets at the top of the injectors go right around here. You can see that some of those broke, so those have to be replaced. And since I'm replacing some of my injectors at this point, since the tips got bent, I'm most likely just going to replace all the injectors. A couple lessons learned while removing the fuel rails and injectors. Now, before we get into that, I want you to keep in mind that you do not need to remove your injectors and fuel rails unless you're replacing your head. So I am replacing my heads, so you do need to go ahead and remove those if you're going to reuse them. So first lessons learned was over on the driver's side. I started working my way back from the front, and I ended up bending the fuel rail a little bit. So I'm going to be replacing that fuel rail. The other lesson learned was it's really hard to get the fuel rail and injectors out as one unit. We did end up bending this one a little bit because we tried to do that. And even with 3 of them loose, we couldn't get that last one to release. And the fuel injectors on this side, 2 of them got bent a little bit on the ends. So on the driver's side, or the passenger side, we went ahead and removed the fuel rail first. And you can see we have the 4 injectors still installed. Now, we tried to remove these with a pry tool, just wiggling them back and forth a little bit, but they are really secure in there. However, because of the issues I had on the driver's side, getting these injectors out, and the age of the motor, I'm gonna go ahead and replace all of my injectors and this one fuel rail that got bent. You might wanna factor this into the cost if you decide to replace your heads, because you may run into issues with the injectors and the seals and gaskets around them being worn out and corroded. So just keep that in mind. If you are considering replacing the heads, it may end up being a little more expensive than you intended initially. Go ahead and remove the 10mm bolts that hold in your valve covers. Remove your valve train. In order to do that, we're going to remove the 8mm bolts that hold down the rocker arms. And we're gonna first start with the springs that don't have any tension on them. Then we will rotate the motor and relieve tension on the other springs and remove those rockers. Now I do have all new push rods and valve springs that are going into the new head, so those do not need to be reused. All right, now we're going to rotate the motor around and get those other springs released. Pull your push rods out. Now, keeping your rocker arms in order shouldn't matter. Also, if you are reusing your push rods, definitely make sure that you put the push rods back into the same locations they came out of, as they can wear differently. So the internal trunnion right here, I will be replacing with those aftermarket ones I went over in video 2 from this series, and we'll be showing you guys how to do that in the reassembly video. Before removing the heads, you want to make sure you get as much coolant out of the block as possible. If you do get coolant in there, it's not the end of the world. You just want to make sure you drive it up as quickly as possible, and we'll show you one technique for doing that once we have the head off of here. Since we have this on a motor stand, we were able to drain most of the coolant out through the front. However, if you are doing this with the motor in the vehicle, you should be able to lower the front of the truck down, or car, whatever you're working on, after removing the tires and bumper, so that you can have most of the oil or coolant drain through the front of the block. On the driver's side, it's held in by 10 15mm bolts. Up in the front on the driver's side, you need a 13mm hex key. This is why it was so hard to get the injectors out. You can just see all this crud, probably some sand that was up in there, but also just the aluminum corrosion that occurs between the injector and the wall of the head. So if we were just replacing injectors, we would have no idea that all this fell in here. So definitely make sure you clean out around your injectors as much as possible. But even as much as you clean, there's probably still going to be some stuff that falls in here. So if you are replacing your injectors and you're that far into it, you might want to pull the heads off just to make sure that there's nothing in there. Use a 10mm to remove the lifter trace. And the lifters will just pull right out. Some of them will. So you'll see that with each lifter tray, 2 of the lifters are going to come out, and then 2 are going to remain in the head. So basically you have your AFM and non-AFM lifters, and now you can see which cylinders are being deactivated and which ones are remaining active all the time. Next, we're going to remove the oil valley cover, and in order to do that, we need to pull off the high pressure fuel pump. And if you guys have any of these check engine light codes, that most likely means your high pressure fuel pump is bad, and we have a whole video walking you through how to change that. That does not involve pulling your motor. We have 13mm bolts to remove, but before removing this, you want to make sure that cylinder 1 is at top dead center. That way there's no pressure on the spring that operates the high pressure fuel pump. And you want to back this off evenly, so a little bit on each side, so this can rise up as there is a spring in there. All right, there you go. So that's that spring we mentioned, so you just want to make sure you have that cylinder 1 at top dead center. Now we can remove the oil valley cover. There are 8 13mm bolts that hold it down. Actually, I stand corrected, there are 9. There's one more up front right here. Peel this gasket up carefully. So these channels right here are actually what activate and deactivate your active fuel management or displacement on demand. So the lifters that pulled out with the lifter trays are your collapsible lifters. The ones that stayed in there are your standard lifters. So what we're going to be doing is blocking off these channels. We're also going to be tuning it out of the vehicle because you need to do both. You can't do one or the other. But it is important to block these off so that you're not getting oil down into those lifters anymore that are not collapsible. It looks like cylinders 1, 4, 6, and 7 are the ones that have the fuel management. So those are the cylinders that are deactivating. And these other 4 are the ones that are always running. Next, remove your power steering pump so that you can access the timing cover up front. It's held in by 4 13mm bolts. Now we're going to remove the timing cover. It's held in by a whole bunch of 13mm bolts. We'll see if this one holds it into. I'm guessing not, but we'll find out. And if I haven't mentioned it yet in this video, I love having this impact. It just makes everything super easy to work on. Now there's also 2 bolts that run up into the cover from the oil pan. Be careful wherever you're prying that you're not messing up the mating surface. All right, we got a connection running down here. So we found this electrical connection in here, and it looks like it plugs up somewhere underneath the oil pan up behind here. So you may want to pull the oil pan off first. So we're going to pull the oil pan next. So we're going to just set this back up temporarily, and I'll put a screw through it. Oil pan is held in by 13mm bolts. You may notice a problem if you're looking on the left side of your screen that the engine stand is bolted into the oil pan. However, there are 3 other points of contact between the stand and the motor, so we're just going to pull that one out. We have to come from the back side, probably. That'll work. Please tell me you got that. I got it. So we are able to access that electrical connection that we found when we pulled off the timing cover. So we're gonna disconnect that. We can just lift it up and pull that off. There it goes. Now we can remove the timing cover. All right. And there is a retainer.
Does it not fit?
Clip. No, there's just a little clip up in there. That clip is actually loose, interestingly enough. Remove your oil pump. It's held in by 13mm bolts. It looks like there are 4 of them. Release the tension on the timing chain by prying back here. Basically, this is the tensioner. So because I have the motor this far apart, I am going to replace the tensioner and the timing chain just simply because I'm in here anyway and I am over 100,000 miles. And I'm going to keep sounding like a broken record saying that, but I'm trying to do as much preventative maintenance as I can while I'm in here. So in order to prevent damaging anything, because this chain is still good and would last for quite a while, I'm going to use a nylon pry tool and then a pry bar right here. And basically you want to pry up against this tensioner. You're going to push it up, and then we're taking a small Allen key and sliding it through. Are you through on the other side? Yep. Yeah, you're through. All right. There you go. Now the tension is released on your timing chain. Now the new tensioner comes with a clip already in there that you're just going to pull out. Now we're going to remove the 24mm bolt right here. So I'm going to hold that tight on the motor there. So that bolt is removed. I'm just going to set that up top here. Now you want to be careful to not pull this off. You want to pull the entire timing chain assembly and keep pressure on this while you're pulling that off. There is tension on this here and it can come apart. So there you go, we got a zip tie. We need an extra guy because my hands are all oily holding this together, but you want to make sure you zip tie this. Now we are going to be disassembling this a little bit further in the next video, but for now we're just going to safely set it to the side. Remove the 4 T40 Torx bolts holding in the cam cover plate. So we are ready to pull the cam out. We went ahead and got a bolt that matched the threads of the bolt that we just pulled out of there. And you want this to have a little extra leverage because you want to make sure that you're not dragging the lobes of the camshaft across your bearings. That can completely destroy the bearings, and you want to have a little bit more leverage to pick that back end of the cam up as you work it out. So we're gonna pull, and I just felt it catch right there. So all right, so it just dropped down right there. Now is when you need to really pick it up, and you need to use this bolt as leverage to do that because you don't want it to drag. Okay, I'm free. Just make sure as soon as you have resistance that you lift it up and walk it over top of the bearing. Goes. I just got caught up on something again. Nice. All right. As you saw, it didn't take that long to get out, maybe a minute, and just take your time with it, rotate it around when you lock up until it releases again, and just try to keep the weight off of the cam. Lift it up so that there's nothing on, or keep it off of the bearings. So having a little extra leverage in the beginning definitely helps, and then this will help when we go to put the new one back in as well. So that's the motor fully disassembled, at least as much as we need to do for this job. In the next video, we are going to put this motor back together with all the new components that we got. We almost have a full teardown. We really just have the crank in. and the piston. So if we remove those, we'd pretty much just be left with the block. So in the next video, we're gonna put this together, so definitely stay tuned for that. If you have any comments or questions about anything that we did in this video, please leave them below. I hope you guys stick around for the whole series where we are deleting the full DOD and AFM for my truck. It should be exciting to get this back into the truck and see how much power we make, and know that we have the peace of mind that this is not gonna fail due to an AFM lifter failing. So thanks for watching. See you guys here next time.